Good evening. As most of you know, I'm Jeremy's brother. Many of you have also met our father, and my father couldn't be here tonight due to some unforeseen events. He was not able to make the trip, and so he prepared some remarks that he asked me to deliver. So these are really on behalf of my father and what he wanted to say tonight. And my father begins really with a story. Those of you who know him know that he loves to tell stories. One morning when Jeremy was a junior in high school, he walked into school and suddenly the assistant principal, who happened to be the rabbi's wife, leapt up, wrapped Jeremy in her arms in a giant hug. Now you can imagine that for a nice yeshiva boy like Jeremy, this was startling, even kind of scary. Jeremy had no idea what had caused this outburst of emotion. But quickly, the rabbi's wife explained, and she said, "Jeremy, you're the first student from our school to ever get into MIT, and you did it as a high school junior, no less." And with this hug from an unlikely source, Jeremy began his journey. He began to chart a path, one that blended intellectual curiosity, plain old super smarts, and an uncommon kindness and caring for people. Jeremy studied chemistry at MIT, balancing a rigorous academic program with building a Dati community in the MIT dorms. He graduated with both a BS in chemistry and a circle of lifelong friends, many of whom later followed him here to Israel. Jeremy first came to Israel in 1981 as a student at Hebrew University and then later at Weizmann. And of course, this path was really no surprise to my parents. Jeremy's crib was surrounded from birth by a massive collection of books about chemistry from my father, and books about Judaism, Hebrew language, and Hebrew literature from my mother. Now, as many of you know, my father was a professor of organic chemistry, and he taught a wide variety of students. My brother learned from the youngest age, as I did, that chemistry is the root of all natural science. From chemistry, the fundamental building blocks of life emerge. All other sciences are merely the details. My mother was a professor of Hebrew literature and Jewish studies in New York, and she was Jeremy's inspiration in the study of Judaism, and she imbued in him a deep appreciation of the connection that binds Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael to the historical language of the Jewish people. Jeremy formally declared Aliyah at age 26 and entered the Army, where he created new coursework for Air Force pilots. Now this was physics coursework, but since, as Jeremy knew from my father, chemistry is the root of all other science, teaching physics was no big deal. Now, Jeremy first faced and defeated cancer when he was 30. He was treated at Sloan Kettering in New York, but he never wavered in his commitment to return to Israel as soon as the treatment was complete. Anytime there was a crisis in Israel during the year that Jeremy was in New York, he knew he would be back as soon as he could help. And Jeremy indeed returned to Jerusalem that year, and from there he started the next phase of his journey. He soon met Lisa and fell deeply in love. He raised 2 boys, who are now young men. And you could see that even when the boys were toddlers, Jeremy had inspired them to follow a course of brilliance and kindness that was very much a part of Jeremy's soul. Now, Jeremy had to tackle a new challenge in his 40s. Cancer recurred and he fought it again, first with conventional treatment and then with a stem cell transplant. Now, Jeremy being Jeremy, became as expert as the doctors treating him in the technology behind these treatments. He consulted regularly with Dr. Google, and by reading highly technical academic papers, he soon knew as much as anyone else in the world about stem cell transplants. Now you see, even in the face of a long battle with cancer, Jeremy's intellectual curiosity found expression. And over the recent years, even as he overcame medical challenge after medical challenge, his intellectual breadth expanded. He served as CTO for several startups, consulted for other companies on intellectual property, and continued to study Limudei Kodesh, finding new areas of inquiry in religious texts. Sometimes studying texts he had studied before with a new view or a new perspective, and in his last few years he was particularly drawn to mystical sources he had never considered before. Now, in recent years after my mother died, Jeremy and my father would talk daily, sometimes even twice a day. They would discuss politics, medicine, science, technology, and there was always a great deal of humor in their exchange. My father reminded me of a joke that he and Jeremy shared back in 2008. And if you know my father and you know Jeremy, you know the joke is likely to be a bit off color. So I will apologize and beg your indulgence in advance. My father was here in Jerusalem during the celebration of Israel's 60th anniversary. There were many dignitaries here: George Bush, Tony Blair, Mikhail Gorbachev. And my father went for his usual morning walk, and the streets were packed with police cars and military vehicles, and there were helicopters all over the sky. As my father continued to walk, it seemed that he was being followed by a helicopter. Why should he be followed? Was my father a person of interest? Now, my father became so worried that he called Jeremy on the cell phone. He explained to him what happened. Jeremy's response was the following. He said, "Dad, enjoy your walk. Don't worry. The police have already profiled you and know that there is no way you could handle 72 virgins." You see, Jeremy's humor was as funny as it was reassuring. So how did Jeremy face all these challenges and never lose his positive outlook on life and his positive outlook on the people around him? Now, my father found the following quote in the philosophy of Shem Tov ben Yosef ibn Falkara, who wrote a consolation treatise, Balm for Assuaging Grief. Now, my father didn't pick this randomly. This was actually the subject of my mother's PhD thesis. And Falkara called for a remedy for anguish. He called for a harmony of faith and reason and mental well-being, which gives the mind insight to understand the ways of the universe and to give the body the fortitude to endure its pains. In her thesis, my mother translated Falkara as follows: "In your agony await the mercies of your Creator, and in such terror and sorrow put trust in your Maker. Intellect is a sharp blade, all worries to smite. Your wisdom is your weapon, so combat them in might."